Hello, everyone. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming today. As you know, today I'll be sharing with you some things I know about Mami Wata, specifically in relation to these two objects here. I'll begin with this figure by Joseph Chukwu that was commissioned by British anthropologist Jill Salmons and gifted to Pam Brinks, who was in the College of Nursing here at the University of Iowa, who turned around and gave it to the University of Iowa Stanley Museum of Art in 1991. And I'll be talking about Eric Adjetey Anang's Mami Wata coffin that the museum commissioned in 2017. The first thing I'd like to say is that the water spirit, commonly known as Mami Wata, has been recognized throughout Africa, mostly in the west and central regions, since perhaps as early as the earliest European contact in the late 15th century. And it's taken on the name Mami Wata, which is a pidgin English expression, more recently in the early 20th century. And the image that you see here, the composition of a figure holding up a snake, in fact, corresponds precisely to the height of colonial activity in Africa in the late 19th and early 20th century, when European impresarios, and Karl Hagenbeck in particular, based in Hamburg, Germany, initiated what later became known as Völkerschauen, or people shows, human zoos, where basically businessmen would go around to areas of the colonized world and bring people back to Europe to showcase exotic culture. In the 1880s, actually 1875 was the earliest example of this in Hamburg, Germany, when Karl Hagenbeck brought back Laplanders and reindeer from Finland and showcased them as examples of exotic people, and realized how successful it was, and began collecting other animals and more people. And among them was a woman from Southeast Asia, perhaps from Samoa or Borneo, commonly referred to as Madame Jauta, that was trained by Hagenbeck's assistant as a snake charmer. There were postcards advertising this woman's work produced in Germany in the 1880s, and that postcard was later reproduced in India. About 12,000 copies of this postcard were sent from Kumasi, Ghana, to India and redistributed back to Ghana, where this image of this snake charmer was widespread and a major form of inspiration for artists, including Joseph Chukwu. Joseph Chukwu was based in southeast Nigeria, and he passed away in 1986. He was the brother of the famous sculptor Akpan Chukwu, who first received an image of this snake charmer in 1909, and that was commissioned by a British district officer based in the area. And so we do have very specific dates for the dissemination of a particular image of this snake charmer that fueled massive amounts of Mami Wata figures like this based on that image. You can see that the body is truncated at the waist, and that is precisely the way that the postcard appears. You can see the round decorations around the waist and around the neck. Those are in fact the artist's adaptations of coins wrapped around the dress worn by the performer. And also the use of pigment in this particular object is consistent with indigenous chalks that are used in initiation ceremonies among young women. And this is very unlike other examples that feature commercial pigments, enamel-based commercial pigments. So what you see here is a variation that emphasizes the use of indigenous chalk-like based pigments. She is emphatically white, and this is a Nigerian representation of otherness. This is a Nigerian and, in fact, broadly speaking, African representation of cultural otherness, and which in this context is white people. As the image of Mami Wata spread throughout Africa and other areas of the world, the skin tone conforms to local conventions of otherness. In other areas, it's more of a lighter brown color. In this case with Eric Adjetey Anang, who had recently participated in Black Lives Matters activities in Madison, Wisconsin. He chose a black Mami Wata to represent the exoticism and the sort of marginalization, the marginalization and violence experienced by Black Americans. And so emphasizing blackness in this particular example of Mami Wata emphasizes the otherness of blackness in America. In this context, in the early 20th century, this otherness is white people. So we're looking at a spectrum here of representation in terms of local conventions of otherness among Black Americans and among Nigerian artists working in the early 20th century. This particular artist's style is unique in that it is composed of multiple segments that are nailed together and carefully measured and drawn out on blocks of wood with a pencil. Joseph and other members of the Chukwu family shared this stylistic convention, which was introduced by Akpan Chukwu, and that was specifically to basically mass-produce objects that were available to both tourists and local priests that used these objects on shrines in order to communicate with Mami Wata. The importance of Mami Wata for people is primarily matters of economic wealth, fertility, vanity. Because of Mami Wata's associations with European exchange, there's also a lot to do with capitalism in terms of her value, personal gain, personal wealth, and independent power, as opposed to the more communal social means of support within traditional communities in Africa. She represents a new direction of independence and personal gain. So again, going back to these stylistic features, Akpan Chukwu, Joseph Chukwu, and other members of this artist family created these for both tourists and Mami Wata priests and priestesses. I will say that among Anang Ibibio peoples in southwest Nigeria, it is relatively rare for women to have any sort of political authority because it's a patriarchal society. And so the fact that women could be priestesses of Mami Wata was exceptional in terms of the spiritual and in some cases political power that would afford women within that sort of culture. So very powerful in terms of what women could offer people suffering from issues of infertility or economic disparity in consulting a priestess who she herself or him, whether it's a priest or priestess, these members of the priesthood are themselves celibate. That sort of a requirement is part of the agreement with Mami Wata. And the decision to become a priest or priestess of Mami Wata is usually the result of dreams in which the soon-to-be priest or priestess becomes worried by the spirit of Mami Wata. They will consult a diviner and the diviner will say, you need to create a shrine for Mami Wata. And then in some cases, there are devotees who become priests and priestesses who then treat others. I think it's very important to recognize the uniqueness of Mami Wata objects such as this, because they belong to a broader group of objects in which African artists are representing Europeans. In this case, it's specific to the way that Europeans represented Africans during the history of human zoos. So there's a very complex, intertwined sort of representation of cultural difference in this object. They're basically appropriating a European appropriation of otherness. And there's a separation of 1975 to 2017. So nearly 2 generations of difference between these two objects. And this object is from southern Ghana, even though it was, I should say, let me take that back. The artist is from southern Ghana. Eric Adjetey Anang belongs to Ga cultural heritage, based around the Accra region of southern Ghana. This is an area of Ghana that over the last 20 years has very forcefully targeted and sought to eliminate Mami Wata entirely because of the fluorescence of the Pentecostal charismatic church, which recognizes Mami Wata as a Christian demon. And so she has become a target of the church, which ironically has also been the center of one of the most significant areas of proliferation of imagery of Mami Wata, because they use these images in activities of exorcism and education in order to show people what this Christian demon looks like, in order to avoid it, in order to learn about it and why you should stay away from it. And so it's rather ironic that this area of oppression is also the leading center of dissemination for imagery of this water spirit. And this is in the Accra region of southern Ghana, where Eric is from. He goes back and forth to Accra and Madison, Wisconsin as an active artist. And in this case, the reason that he chose to represent Mami Wata is because we asked him to, very, very simply. So when I called Eric up on the phone and asked him if he would be interested in showing his work, generally speaking, fantasy coffins, as they're commonly referred to, in Ga language, they're called abebu arakai, or receptacles of proverbs, is the English translation for that term. In order to generate the income that he needed to make other fantasy coffins for his solo exhibition, we began with this commission. And Eric asked the museum what we would be interested in seeing. And he said also that he proposed to create a mid-scale coffin. As you can see, this is not necessarily something that any full-grown adult could fit inside of, so that even though it is a life-sized human figure, it is a mid-scale coffin, unlike the red fish in the gallery behind you. So the former curator of education, in fact, commissioned him to make this Mami Wata figure, I think because Mami Wata has featured prominently in the history of education at this museum. So that is the literal reason why this object takes on the image of Mami Wata, because the museum commissioned Eric to make it that way. But thinking more carefully about the role of Mami Wata in this area of West Africa, Eric had no hesitation to make this in the form of Mami Wata. And in fact, the hesitation that he did have was the idea of making a mid-scale coffin, which made him uncomfortable because of the fact that those are made for children, and he didn't want that sort of relationship in the process of this commission. So he chose to make it larger in order to avoid that uncomfortable relationship. So these are the kinds of things that you don't normally hear about African art and the decisions behind why they look the way they do. I want to share with you the important people that have devoted their life to this type of research on Mami Wata in particular. First and foremost is Henry Druel, former professor of African art and art of the African Diaspora at University of Wisconsin-Madison. He now lives in New York, and he has documented shrines devoted to Mami Wata since at least 1975, if not earlier. The other scholar is the British anthropologist Jill Salmons, who published this object here. It was on the cover of African Arts Journal in 1977, and she wrote about the history of Joseph and his brother Akpan Chukwu, and the fact that Mami Wata represents an indigenous water spirit named Eka Abasi among Anang Ibibio peoples from southeast Nigeria. So when Akan and Joseph first encountered this image of this Samoan or this snake charmer from Southeast India, they saw here a perfect complement to pre-existing beliefs in a water spirit named Eka Abasi, who is the mother of God, who has a profound relationship with a rainbow serpent that exists in the celestial realms that causes rain to fall down to Mother Earth. So this image of a woman holding this snake gels perfectly with this indigenous concept of the mother of God and the celestial rainbow serpent or python. So there was a pre-existing religious institution just basically ready to take on this image. Another stylistic feature that's special to Joseph and Akpan and other members of this family is the use of fibers in the hair. Joseph actually acquired that from a local store in southeast Nigeria that specialized in making barristers' wigs. It's the same exact material. I'm still trying to figure out the metal tag. If anybody knows what metal, I'm thinking this is an export tag. I've seen them on other objects, in particular, flat woven rugs from Turkey from the Keith Akapol collection has an identical tag. I think it's an export tag. I'm still working on that. I can't quite figure it out. But because I've seen one that's nearly identical on a wool textile from Turkey, makes me think that it's a customs export tag. The original postcard that these Nigerian artists used to create objects like this has been lost. And so the extant examples that we have are those that were printed in Bombay, India. So people are still looking for that postcard, and they may never find it. I also want to call your attention to the fact that we do have work by another artist in my colleague Diana Tweet's exhibition Generations, which features a photograph of Filipino peoples that were part of the St. Louis World's Fair, that were part of this broader global phenomenon of human zoos and Volkersschauen. And so there is a thematic relationship between, Mami Wata as it draws inspiration from the snake charmer that paraded around and actually showed, among many places, Folies Bergère in Paris, home to some of the most famous Impressionist paintings in the world, and also several areas throughout the United States. I'm not sure if she was in St. Louis, but I know she was in Philadelphia. And she was married to the impresario that brought her to the United States. He was a hunter that Hagenbeck hired to go out and collect people like her to come back to Europe and other areas of the Western world to basically demonstrate why colonial power should be justified. That was the basic mission of the human zoo phenomenon, was to take people like her and to bring them and show them literally within cages, to show the Western world standards of civilization and the reason why we should keep colonizing people like this. So very traumatic in terms of the violence and the inhumanity surrounding the logic, but also one of the most brilliant and creative forms of artistic expression, not only in Africa, but the world, because of its highly adaptive basis of appropriating this European image of otherness and integrating it into pre-existing indigenous faith-based institutions. So this particular image that began in at least, there's a photograph actually of one of these figures with the same exact composition that's dated 1901. This is the earliest photographic evidence we have for this particular composition related to the Samoan snake charmer. It wasn't until around the 1960s where this same exact image spread to Central Africa. But again, these are places in the world where water spirits have a deep history of value and significance. And so embracing this image of Mami Wata, has spread like wildfire because it complemented pre-existing beliefs in water spirits, and also not to forget the importance of serpents and the rainbow python and its relationship to Mother Earth. So a perfect marriage that you see here in both of these objects. Jill Salmons noted in her most recent essay, there was a major exhibition on art for Mami Wata that traveled from the Fowler Museum at UCLA in 2008 to the Smithsonian. And she wrote that during a recent visit to this area of Southwest Nigeria, the quote-unquote cult, it's a problematic term that I choose not to endorse, but to quote her, the cult of Mami Wata has largely vanished in this area of Southeast Nigeria. And while it may not be as prevalent among Anang Ibibio peoples, it has migrated west to Ogoni peoples. And so, she credits the spread of missionary activity in this area as the reason for its collapse. But at the same time, in southern Ghana, it's the very reason for the broader dissemination of her image, even though it's demonized. In the 1970s, when missionary activity was really picking up in this area, Jill has noted that there was a fluorescence among practitioners of Mami Wata to sort of resist missionary activity, and that seems to have waned based on her most recent experiences there in probably around 2003. Taking a closer look at the details of Eric's work. So Eric does all of the carpentry, and it's interesting to note the details of construction are actually quite similar. You can see the way that he has attached the arms as separate pieces of wood, which is identical to the way that Joseph and Akpan and other members of the Chukwu family create their works. The history of carpentry related to fantasy coffins from Ghana is actually rooted in a history of relationship with Swiss missionaries that taught them how to make canoes in a particular way, and they adapted those carpentry techniques into making objects like this. Eric worked with another artist named Francis Atofe, who's a professional artist and painter in his own right, and he does all of the paintings for Eric's work, so he didn't paint them at all himself. And when he was working on this, I saw him paint both this Mami Wata coffin and the red fish in fragments of the canon. And you can see here the other kind of pigment that's actually geared more for, I don't want to say just tourists, but basically the opposite of what you see here, this very matte chalk surface, these kinds of pigments that might be more suitable for initiation ceremonies among the Anang Ibibio. Eric chooses to use a very high gloss enamel paint for all of his work. It is more durable, and so I don't know, I mean, his decision to use that glossy surface, it also sort of evokes the sort of watery realm from which Mami Wata originates. And speaking of watery realms, I want to share another piece of information about the fact that one of the most authoritative texts on the demonic power of Mami Wata in southern Ghana has to do with a man that was a former Satanist that published a book about his experiences of conversion and meeting Mami Wata underwater as the sort of Satan's cohort. And so among Pentecostal charismatic Christians in southern Ghana, they view Mami Wata as basically Satan's leading seductive agent. And that is an aspect of Mami Wata that I haven't yet fully addressed, is her powers of seduction. And many people that are out to get Mami Wata and take her down are very, very skeptical of beautiful women because they might be Mami Wata. And it's a fact that according to the literature and the people that have researched this, there are some women that if they're too beautiful, they find it very hard to find a partner because there's so much suspicion around her possible possession by this water spirit. And this is one of her, one of the benefits of being a devotee of Mami Wata is, increased sexual prowess. And, I mean, Eric has sort of like picked up on that. I mean, this very sexualized representation of this water spirit that you don't see in this image. And so Eric is aware of that, but then at the same time, most water spirits from Africa are represented in the nude. That's a very common stylistic choice. So, I mean, I think if anything, in terms of composition, his decision to include a snake is part of this broader compositional representation of this water spirit. Oh, and then of course, obviously he's represented the mermaid tail. And devotees and also scholars of Mami Wata have recognized the fact that in images such as this, where you don't see the lower half of the body, this is interpreted as an expression of secrecy, like she's hiding her tail, because there is so much suspicion of deceit surrounding Mami Wata's powers. And so this compositional decision to hide the lower half of the body isn't just a literal representation of this postcard where it's not in the picture. It's her being deceitful, and it's hiding her mermaid-like tail, which is a sign of her subterranean watery realm where she hangs out with the devil. So it's a brilliant example of how people that use objects like this point to the religious sort of context for why there's something missing here. It's not because of the print, it's because she's hiding something. The history of mermaids in African art is also quite fascinating in terms of the fact that European ships have been in this area of West Africa since the 16th century, and many of them very likely had mermaids on the figureheads of these ships, most likely had mermaids. And so the possibility of exposure to a mermaid and its other depictions, including the tail, may stem from those sort of early encounters 500 years ago. but they also may refer to the fact that manatees are indigenous to this area of West Africa, and the sort of human-like physiognomy of manatees definitely belongs to the wider interest and belief in water spirits, but may also relate to the incorporation of a mermaid tail that you see in this particular example. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Eric was commissioned, was he referencing that piece from the collection at the same time? Or?
I think indirectly, because our education department has used this a lot, and that was the decision to choose Mami Wata for this work, but he didn't study it closely the way that like Dante Hayes, he did serious visual research on our African ceramics collection in order to make that sculpture. And this is temporary, and it replaced, you may have seen the ceramic pot that was here to demonstrate that relationship. But no, Eric, he actually didn't. That's a good question. You had a question, yeah.
What about her facial decorations?
Yeah, so I mean, I've seen photographs of this woman, and I don't see any facial tattoo marks on her. I think there's definitely a bit of artistic license at work, and I think that sort of decorative embellishment you see, I wouldn't be surprised if you would find that among other objects outside the Mami Wata pantheon of artwork. So I think it belongs to like wider artistic conventions that aren't specific to Mami Wata or the snake charmer herself.
Can you just clarify for me again, the postcard piece? What were you saying about this being a representation, a postcard that was distributed?
Yeah. So the postcard depicts the snake charmer holding snakes. And so when these artists in Nigeria caught hold of this postcard, they were like, this is Mami Wata. Yeah. And so that postcard was originally published in Germany. None of those originals have been found. But in around 1955, traders from India and Kumasi printed 12,000 more in India and had them come back. And so all of the examples that you see are those printed by the Sri Ram Calendar Company in Bombay, India. Yeah, so they saw this image and they immediately recognized it as, Eka Abasi, the mother of God. This water spirit. Yeah. Another question?
Yeah, I'm still confused about the mermaid tail.
Okay.
And whether that's just kind of a appropriation of a European thing from the prows of the ships, or is it, there is a mermaid tradition and a selkie tradition in England and Ireland.
A what tradition?
Selkie,
Oh.
which is a human seal kind of magical creature.
Yeah, so.
And so I'm wondering, but I've also seen pictures of, I guess they're reproductions of this postcard you're talking about, maybe where the snake charmer has feet.
Oh, sure.
No tail.
Yeah, this is, yeah. This is just.
One style, or is it kind of fluid?
There's multiple representations of this snake charmer. The one that reached the coast of Nigeria in the early 20th century is this, where you don't see anything beneath her waist. And in fact, it also includes a little visual insert of a boy playing a flute while snakes are dancing. And Joseph's brother Akpan, one of the characteristic features of his sculptures includes this sort of what he calls an excrescence, which is his misunderstanding of that visual insert in the postcard. He didn't know what it was. So he represented it sculpturally in his figures as just this sort of protuberance that doesn't make any sense, but it was his visual interpretation of that insert in the photograph. You're right, there are other depictions of her full body. It's just that the postcard that they got a hold of didn't. So whether or not the inspiration for the mermaid form came from Europe or was more of a local pre-existing idea, it remains open to speculation. The importance is that it attests to her watery origins. Basically, she's from the land under the sea with, according to the Pentecostal charismatic Christians, Satan. But it evokes her overseas exotic origins from beyond the Atlantic. So it points to the watery realms of her origins, and also the fact that she's from across the ocean. So there's those two reasons there. It sort of plays up on her exotic power and her foreign origins. But at the same time, fits perfectly with these pre-existing ideas about the importance of water spirits. Yeah.
This mermaid character is, as she explained, universal in all cultures, going back ancient times. So what we have here is something extremely humanly basic and universal.
Yeah.
That has been adopted by very many cultures around the world. So there's something deeply human about the fear of what's underwater.
Yeah. So Douglas Fraser wrote a really amazing essay about that global context of the representation of mermaids. He was a professor at Columbia University, and he talks specifically about that. And you're absolutely right. The fear of what's beneath the surface of the water, not being able to see it. There's some sort of idea of deception and secrecy involved, and that's a lot to do with the mistrust around her among Christians. But I think another really amazing thing that I learned recently, and you had your hand up, I want to answer your question. So Jill Salmon's documented cases in Southeast Nigeria where Christians are also followers of Mami Wata, but in order to stay in the church, they basically commission artists to create these objects, and they place them in a communal shrine managed by a diviner who is basically the hub for their devotion, rather than them taking these objects back home and their friends finding out and kicking them out of the church. So there isn't like this clean separation between, the Christians and then the devotees to Mami Wata. There's overlap, which is also, sort of common in terms of syncretism and the blending of belief systems throughout Africa, and, looking at that syncretism stylistically here makes perfect sense. You had a question.
I'm very confused. Mami Wata originated in Africa, and then this picture shows up on a postcard of a snake charmer. Well, I don't see the correlation between a snake charmer and Mami Wata.
Okay.
That's one.
Okay.
And then last night, we went to see a movie at Film Scene about Mama Watu. I think everybody should see it that's interested in this. And it wasn't a mermaid. It was water there. But they did have young women. I guess those are the debutantes that you're talking about, to Mama Wata. I don't know. I guess I'm just confused about.
No, it's
kind of confusing. To me.
Sure.
Like, how would you get a snake charmer compared to Mama Watu?
So again, the origin of this representation of Mami Wata is directly out of the history of human zoos that were advertised, and these artists got a hold of one of those postcards, and they saw in this postcard a reflection of their pre-existing beliefs in this water spirit that they refer to as Mami Wata.
I was told that this image was a Mama Watu from India.
So the postcard originally produced in Germany was reprinted in India.
So now I'm seeing the correlation.
Okay, okay.
I'm seeing that correlation. And then I noticed the hair, is straighter than
Yeah.
others.
Well, these are stylistic choices that are particular to the artists, although the early representations of Mami Wata emphasized long, straight hair because it was about exotic otherness, unlike, locks, I mean, like, this straight hair is definitely not a local thing. And that's a deliberate choice. So whether it was a reference to European or, in fact, Indian style hair, that's the two leading stylistic sources of inspiration. Speaking of India, shrines devoted to Mami Wata are typically surrounded by other images of Hindu deities, one of which is the god known as Densu, which is like the male manifestation of Mami Wata that's based on a Hindu deity with 3 heads. And so you see images of Densu as the male aspect of Mami Wata, commonly surrounded by all of these gifts, which typically tend to be European consumer goods, sweet treats, cosmetics, things that emphasize the importance of vanity and wealth. Usually they're surrounded by these depictions of Hindu deities, because there is a recognition of India as this other place that's a representation of otherness, along with Europe. So India and Europe are these others with the capital O. And so Hanuman is among the deities that you might see, and Densu with the 3 heads is also another deity that you'll see in Mami Wata shrines. They typically appear on a table. I think that's one of the first aspects of a Mami Wata shrine, is setting up the table. Scholars have pointed out that there is no precedence for tables, for shrines, that it's a very a European thing. To have a shrine for Mami Wata, you have to have a table. And then you put all of the things on the table in your shrine for Mami Wata. And if you don't keep her happy by offering her sweet, delicious, beautiful things often, she will retaliate. And there are, unfortunately, among the things that you have to agree to and make sacrifices for in order to be a priest and priestess, including celibacy. In some other cases, maybe historically offering the life of someone. But those are sort of like anecdotal pieces of information around the dangers of Mami Wata. But I hope I answered your question in terms of India's role here as the proliferation of this image.
Right. I just was on a tour, and that's what was said. Also in the movie, it talks about beauty and the beauty of the Mama Watu.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was emphasized in the movie last night.
Yeah, beauty, Mami Wata loves beautiful things. It's about vanity. Most Mami Wata shrines have a mirror because it symbolizes vanity, and it's also a threshold between the terrestrial and the watery realms. I don't know if any of you were able to see Aline Mota's film that was here. She used mirror imagery throughout her films. That was a direct reference to Mami Wata. She placed mirrors underwater and played with the light, and it was a very subtle and sophisticated reference to Mami Wata as an aspect of cultural hybridity and her own sort of archival research on her background and the diasporic experience that's part of her history. So beauty. Priests and priestesses of Mami Wata focus on self-beauty, and so that's why you usually see mirrors in Mami Wata shrines. So yeah, excellent observation. I'm planning to go see this film. Isn't it showing today too?
And tomorrow.
Yeah.
Monday night as well. The celibacy thing plays out. Sorry, I know you want to.
In the case there, was that actually produced to be used as part of a shrine, or was it for?
It wasn't. It was commissioned by Jill Sammons, the scholar that published it, commissioned by her as a gift for her friend, Pamela Brink, who was in the College of Nursing here at Iowa. She makes the point that in terms of materials and style and quality, there's absolutely no difference between objects like this that were made for tourists and objects that are used in religious contexts. The same people make them, and they just send them to different people for different patrons. Yeah.
Was there a representation of Mami Wata prior to this postcard? Do we know, by comparison, what Mami Wata looked like before artists would have seen the postcard?
So the idea is that the concept of Mami Wata reaches back centuries, but this particular compositional treatment of her originates, it points to the postcard that came out in the 1880s. So other depictions of this spiritual entity that predate this, they're separate from the postcard, and so they will look different. Although, there's a deep history of representations of water spirits that include masks and figures, but the snake charmer thing is specific to like 1901 was the first time it was ever photographed. And then those postcards, those were produced in Hamburg in the 1880s, but artists didn't use that image until the earliest document we have for that is 1901. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question about the coffin
Mm-hmm.
and what you said about the artist's feelings about it. So what about other coffins that are actually made for children who die?
Mm-hmm.
Are they smaller than this? Is there something different about them?
They are smaller. Eric has made coffins for pets too, quite small. So, he has like multiple scales for different patrons. So yes, the answer is they are smaller depending on the commission.
What kind of images does he make for children's coffins?
Oh, for children's, I honestly don't know. He didn't talk about that. But I've seen hundreds of motifs, including those for Christians, which represent the Bible, and usually don't vary from that. Whereas some of the indigenous faith-based practitioners in the Accra area, the fish is one of the more common motifs because fishing is such a huge industry. There's so many fishermen. That is the motif that attests to their livelihood. Eric Adjetey Anang's grandfather, Kane Kwe, who was among the originators of this art form around 1950, one of his first coffins was an airplane. These aren't answers to those for children, but lots of fish, crabs. A priest's stool is also a common motif among priests in this area. There are white stools that a priest might be buried in. But Eric has traveled the world and had numerous commissions from museums, and he's done popsicles, he's done soda cans, cameras, a stack of kente cloth arranged in the form of a coffin, hammers. I've seen crabs, whales, you name it. It's actually Pa Joe is among the other well-known coffin makers, and he's done basically like buildings, and what else? Oh, there's even a representation, I think, of the the Georges Pompidou Museum in Paris has been among, I mean, it's just, I think they're just like competing with each other to see who can outdo who. So for
Wata would be really unusual.
I mean, at this point, nothing's unusual because they've just gone so far out. For his exhibition, we had a honeybee. Did anyone see the 2017 exhibition? Good. Corn, honeybee, a hot pepper, Mami Wata, the red fish.
Mercedes-Benz?
Pajo does the Mercedes-Benz. He also did a black dress shoe. So that was, yeah. But more recently, like the younger generation of coffin makers, they've just like taken it to another level. And so I think anything goes. In terms of this being unusual, because it was commissioned by the museum for an exhibition, I think in fact it's rather conventional, but you know, in Ghana, I mean, this was never meant to be used as a coffin, but in Ghana, in the Accra region, I do think this would be very unusual because Pentecostal charismatic Christianity has become so predominant. This would be the target, I think, of protest if it was commissioned to be used in that area of Ghana. Yeah. Any other questions? If you haven't, the book about Mami Wata by Henry Druhl is fantastic. He actually published 2 books, one for the exhibition of 2008, and then another one called Sacred Waters that's like a book stop, and is a compilation of scholars around the world that have done some sort of research on or related to water spirits, including Mami Wata. It's a fascinating area of research for art, and thank you for coming today to